Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Bear with me for 30 minutes, and I'll try to make it as fun as John did. So that was a great speech, tough one to follow. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Cargill. So $9.5 billion. By the year 2050, we will have 9.5 billion people on planet Earth. That's a huge number. For those of you that don't know, we have about 6 billion people on Earth today, so about a 30% increase, or about 3 billion additional people on Earth in the next 30 years. I want that number to sink in with you for a minute while I talk a little bit about Cargill and what we do, because usually the first question that's asked of me when I say I'm with Cargill, people say, what does Cargill do? And then we'll come back to the 9.5 billion number in a minute. So Cargill is a US-based global company that operates in the farming, agriculture, industrial, and finance sectors. We have about 155,000 employees worldwide, and we're located in over 70 countries. We do business in over 65 languages, and last year we did about $110 billion US in revenue. Cargill's been in business for 150 years. So a steep tradition in adopting to new and changing times throughout those 150 years. Due to our unique background and diverse businesses that we operate in, we touch about 20% of the world's food. In North America alone, we move about 60,000 tons of feed a day and move 5 million cases of oil a week. Annually, we move about 220 million tons of goods across the oceans. And while all those numbers sound impressive, there's only one number that we're worried about at Cargill, and that's the 9.5 billion people that will live on planet Earth in the next 30 years. That's because we are a purpose-driven organization, and our purpose is to be the leader in nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. That purpose has been consistent at Cargill through the history of Cargill. And what we're trying to figure out now is, how will we nourish the world in the decades to come? Because we're a generation that has a new set of tools, but also a new set of challenges. And as John mentioned, things change faster than they ever have. And we need to be prepared to be able to move the agriculture sectors, the farming sectors ahead through the challenges that we have today, just like our predecessors did 7 generations ago when Cargill was founded. And we need to think about things in a way that are much different even than a decade ago. And part of what we're going through now is a state of digital disruption. So we look back about 18 months ago, we spent time, our senior leadership of Cargill, saying, what do we want to stand for and how are we going to continue to nourish the world as we look forward, and what are the capabilities that we're going to have to change? And some of the things that were talked about were, we take more of a public stand on things? How do we do better in the trading markets? The other things were, how do we invest in digital and analytics? Our CEO has publicly said on a number of times, Cargill is going to become a technology company. So to me, coming to Cargill, having worked at a few startups in the past, to me, becoming a technology company meant something. And it meant that we're going to operate in a different way. We're going to use technology, we're going to create technology, and we're going to move at the pace that a technology company would move. This is significantly different than the historical Cargill that was used to operating in agriculture and food spaces. So Cargill talked about success of a new food ingredient that took 10 years to develop and get to market. And we're talking about how do we deploy from time of idea to time of deployment new digital products in weeks and months instead of years. So we're going through a huge change culturally and with the capabilities that we have to build and the skills that we have to bring in. And then we're also looking at what are different partnerships and different investments that we need to make in order for us to move forward through our journey of continuing to nourish the world in a safe, sustainable way. Lucky for us, we had invested in our in-house center that we call Cargill Business Services. So we have in-house centers. We have 7 in-house centers, capability centers, I guess I should be calling them now. Capability centers across the world with about 5,000 employees. From a technology perspective, the majority of our work is done out of our Bangalore office of about 500 technology employees in that center. Now, we had started our IT journey from our capability center about 4 years ago, and we had these strategic objectives that we wanted to work through short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And I'll say we're about 4 years in from our first employee to where we are today, and I think our focus has been on the bottom 2 boxes, which really is cost savings and labor arbitrage and governance frameworks around existing processes that we had, largely which was talked about earlier. And I think we made a ton of progress in that and started to move up a little bit into global delivery in some of the portfolios that we have. When Cargill decided to declare we're going to become a technology company and digitalization and analytics is going to be one of the 5 core capabilities that we want to be known for, this whole picture changes, in my opinion. No longer can we look at maturing from the left to the right. We built our center, our IT center in Bangalore for a number of reasons. A couple of those reasons being the large access to large engineering talent, very capable engineering talent. And the second one being that we wanted to be close to a startup community, the Silicon Valley of India. And I would say in the bottom 2, we had not capitalized on those 2 opportunities. And as we look at what we want to do to become a technology company and move from just providing and optimizing existing processes to looking at how we build digital products and go to market in different spaces, we have to also start on the right and move down to the left. So that's where a lot of our investments are being made now as we look at not just what are we doing at Cargill, but how are our centers allowing us to move faster in that. So I'm going to talk through a few of these 3 things. So digital disruption and driving a new cultural norm. This has been, I would say, probably our biggest challenge when it comes to our centers, as well as changing the business mindset. So the first thing I talked about was we declared digitalization and analytics a core capability. Part of that cultural norm meant we had to not look at failure or trying things and experimentation as something we don't do. So I would say Cargill historically had been pretty risk averse. We like to know what the return on investment was going to be before we started something. And a lot of that culture was driven by large capital investments that we traditionally had to make in order to open a plant or acquire another physical business. All of our processes, all of our people, all of the mindset and the culture was all built around physical assets, not digital assets. And when we started talking about digitalization and analytics, innovation comes into play, experimentation, moving into an agile mindset and a DevOps world. And that changes a lot of things. especially when we had created centers that were waiting for headquarters to give processes to those centers to execute on. What we're trying to do with this from the cultural norm as we look at our centers is, if we talk about alignment and autonomy, so we need a high level of alignment between what's happening from a headquarters perspective and our center's perspective. And the center needs a lot of autonomy to be able to act on that. And that goes kind of back to what John was saying. If we're all in it for the same purpose, it becomes very easy to execute independently. And as we look at part of changing that culture, this has been a huge change for us, is providing autonomous teams with the empowerment to be able to execute on their own. We started creating digital enterprises, or actual software companies within Cargill HQ. And why that's important is, from a culture perspective, that starts to expose things like, in this example, we have CAN is our animal nutrition business. And what we saw as we started building digital products that we would go to market with, our digital products would start cannibalizing or eating revenue away from our traditional physical products. And there becomes a conflict of that, and it takes strong leadership at the top to make sure that we're doing the right thing to achieve our purpose, but also to move us forward as a company. So we started to see a lot of infighting, and all of that goes back to how do we make sure that we're driving the right outcome and making sure that we're all aligned on that common purpose. Leaning into the discomfort. We have all of these things create discomfort, especially when we start to look at, we have a large part of our enterprise that has been hired, trained, and staffed to do things the way it is today. And then we hire in software engineers, data scientists that want to do things a different way. And it's really, at first, it was really easy for us to walk away from that and say, those guys are just different, they're going to do it a different way, and we have to be okay with it. But as we look at and talk about how do we bring traditional IT along on the digital journey, it becomes important for all of us to lean into those hard conversations and make sure that we're moving forward together. Build the capabilities and attract the right talent. I'm going to start at the bottom with Cargill Digital Labs. So we made an investment in digital labs, and I think this is one of the first areas that I've seen headquarters and our center here in Bangalore truly work together to start building capabilities as one aligned unit. What Digital Labs is really, I would say, the best of all regions of Cargill, working together to build out capabilities like our advanced analytics platform, our cloud platform, start to develop prototypes with the business so that we can prove business value based on working software versus PowerPoint decks. And in order to do this, we had to start hiring software engineers. We had to enable them to do their job, and we had to let the reins go and let them see what they could do. And it's been about 15 months along this journey, but we have seen out of our Bangalore office some huge successes. Some huge successes with capabilities that were fully incubated within our center. So we have a machine learning lab. We call it our machine learning micro lab. And it is all the technologies, capabilities, and people with skills that allow us to implement machine learning into our systems. Not only did they create the technology, but they've also created a coaching service that they offer to other parts of our business that want to get upskilled on machine learning. We started our drone COE. So when we think about how can drones offer new value to a company like Cargill, that's heavy on safety and maybe doing safety inspections via drone, or looking at taking pictures of during harvest season so that we can tell when fruit's going to be ripe. The Bangalore COE we stood up our first drone COE out of Bangalore, out of our centers. So these are examples of things that I would say a year ago we would have done these out of our headquarters office. And we know that we need to leverage our centers to do this, and are making large investments in the centers. Techstars is a startup incubator that we recently invested in. So we're doing a farm to fork incubator out of North America. We're standing up the same thing within our India CBS center. So a lot of what we're doing from a capability perspective, we're doing out of our centers because we built our centers in places that have the talent we need to be able to perform these. From a partnership perspective, we've started looking at startup companies that we can invest in, partner with, or acquire. And a lot of that work now is being done from an exploration perspective out of our Bangalore office and out of our centers because of the access to large number of startups here. I put the bottom three on here not because we have partnerships or investments with Sawtooth, Terraform, or Kubernetes, but because I think it's important as we look at what we're doing from a digital disruption perspective and what we're going through at Cargill. If we would have put this slide up here last year, it probably would have had things like SAP and Oracle and large software vendors on there. We still partner with large software vendors, but we're starting to make investments in the open source community and giving back to the open source community. So as we hire software engineers, we're starting to do a lot more open source, and these are the three areas that we've contributed the most back to. So large investment in Sawtooth and the blockchain open source community as we're contributing back more on permissions and security, and then Terraform and Kubernetes as two of the core technologies that we use as we look at configuration management and cloud platform. So these partnerships are going to be critical for us, and we know that those partnerships are available globally, and our centers have been able to help us with that. So with that, what comes next? And I'm often asked this question of what comes next, and I tend to not make bold predictions of what comes next, but I will say three things. One, I'm confident that technology will not be the limiting factor of what moves Cargill forward. Number two, I'm confident that Cargill will achieve our purpose of nourishing 9.5 billion people on planet Earth in 2050. And the third thing is, I'm confident that our centers are going to play a key role in driving us forward in that mission from a strategic perspective, not just from a process execution perspective. So with that, that's my talk. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for questions, if anybody has any questions.
Hi, I want to know how did you handle your organizational change management? Because technology is easy to adopt, but changing the culture and the thinking and moving from your traditional way of working to the new ways.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for those of you that didn't hear the question, how do we handle organizational change management? My personal answer is not very well. You summed it up. The cultural change is the hard part. The technology is the easy part. And I would say that we're going from, I would say, technology being viewed 18 months ago at Cargill as an expense a back office function that is a necessary evil, and totally looked at as an expense. So 18 months ago, I think anybody you would talk to in the business, the first question would be, how much does it cost? So we're going from that extreme to like wanting to be a technology company and a full DevOps shop, so a huge change management curve. I would say some areas are better than others on how we're handling it. We also have a very diverse, different sectors that we're in that are all at a different level of maturity. I think what we're finding is, and I think it's probably the same at many companies, so this is the third time that I've been through this digital transformation. There's going to be fighting and there's going to be resistance. And it's like it takes time to work through it, and not everybody adjusts to it. But I think we're actually, Cargill is a very adaptable organization. It may move slower than I would hope, because I'm not used to, I'm more used to different speed. But it is everybody is there genuinely trying to do the right thing and adapt. It's just very different than where the organization was headed, I would say, 2 years ago. So declaring one of the core capabilities as digitalization and analytics was a huge change. All right, thank you.